Are stationary random processes always ergodic? And intuitively, it's tempting to think that they are, but in fact, they're not. So let's just think about that intuition. Here I've shown two samples of a random process, and I'm showing the probability density function at a given time t1. And if the process is stationary, then this density function is the same no matter the value of t1. So if t1 was any of these values of time, you'd have the same density function for the random variable at that time, the random value of the process at that time. So that's stationary. Ergodic is if you take one of these sampled waveforms and do a histogram, then if that histogram, when you normalize it to have a unit area, if that histogram is the same function as the density function, the ensemble density function, then the process is ergodic. So intuition might lead us to think that all stationary processes are ergodic because every time value is being taken from the same density function. And if that's the case for every time value, you might think that overall, if you take the histogram of all those time values, then you would always intuitively get the same function as the density function from which those values were drawn. But in fact, this intuition can trick you. So let me give you an example which illustrates the fact that they're not always ergodic. So let's consider an example of the height of an aircraft as it flies over a town, let's say 1 hour after it takes off from Los Angeles to New York. And let's say that town is exactly on the flight path. So let's presume that there are two particular flying heights that that plane can be told to fly at by the air traffic controllers. Let's say 20,000 feet and 30,000 feet. So what would be the density function? If you were to look up from that town and observe an aeroplane flying overhead, what would the types of heights be that you would see? They wouldn't be exactly 20 and exactly 30 because of wind and buffeting. So the density function might look something like this. So some of the planes will be flying a bit around 20,000 feet, some around 30,000 feet, a little bit less, a little bit more, but this would be what you would expect the density function to be that relates to the random process. So now let's think of a couple of actual sample functions. If you're in the town and you look up over that time window when the plane is flying overhead on that day, it might be that that day the plane was told to fly at 20,000 feet. So as it flies overhead, you might get a reading of the height like this. It might be buffeted up and down as air turbulence makes the plane go up and down as it flies overhead over time, but the time sequence you measure would be like this if it was told to fly at 20,000 feet. What about on a different day if that plane, when you look up, was told to fly at 30,000 feet? Then this would be the sequence that you would measure. Now let's look at the histograms of these two sequences. So in this case, the histogram would be centered on 20,000 feet. And so the histogram would look like this for that flight on that day for that sample path. For this one, of course, it's flying at 30,000 feet and the sample path the histogram would look like this. So clearly these two histograms are not the same. They are also not the same as this overall density function. So certainly it is not ergodic. But we just want to confirm for ourselves that it is stationary and sure, this one flies at this height and this one flies at this height, but on any given day, you don't know which of the two that plane is going to have been told to fly at. So certainly the overall density function will have these two peaks. So here's an example where it's a stationary process, but it is not ergodic. So if this video has helped you to understand this concept, give the video a thumbs up. It helps others to find the video. Check out the web page in the description below. You'll find a full categorized listing of all the videos on the channel. And of course, subscribe to the channel for more videos.